Hi everyone, and welcome back to Too Cool for Middle School, where I'm still kind of figuring out the right angles and everything for the camera setup over here, but it is the end of May. It almost felt like we were never going to get to this point in the year. Next week is the last week of school for me, so it'll be summer after that, thank goodness. This has felt like the longest school year of all time. So since it is the end of May, we are going to be talking through the books that I read this month. And I thought with each one, I would just tell you a little bit about like the motivation behind reading each one and kind of like what kept me going through it. Just to give you a few tips about, maybe how to get a little bit more reading done over this summer. Next week when I'm in my classroom, I'm going to pull some of the books from my classroom shelves that I want to read over the summer. So I'll make another video about like my summer TBR. So that should be kind of fun. The first book that I'm going to tell you about isn't like really on my official list, but this is my book. This is the book that I wrote last summer. It's called Leaders and Thinkers in American History, 15 Influential People You Should Know by me. It is currently available for pre-order. It's officially out on June 22nd, and then the ebook is actually out on June 8th. So that's like now, like just in a couple days. So if you're an ebook reader, you can start reading this one really soon. Otherwise, you can save it for kind of the end of June, early July. But I think it's a really good one to read over the summer just to prepare for next school year. And I have a couple of other videos where I talk extensively about it, so I won't go into it too much more, but this one was one of my favorites of the month. Okay, so the first book that I finished this month was Fearless by Mandy Gonzalez. I am a big Mandy fan. She's just amazing. She originated the role of Nina, right? It was Nina on In the Heights, and she's played all kinds of roles on Broadway, and now she's an author, and she just does a bunch of great things. And she wrote this book about a girl from a small Northern California town who goes to Broadway to play like an understudy role for this kind of up-and-coming show. And there's a mystery. It seems like the theater is cursed, and so this main character, Monica Garcia, she learns all about the history of like New York and Broadway as they're trying to solve this mystery before, the day that the show opens. So what kept me motivated to read this book was that I was reading it with my niece, who is also a 12-year-old from a small Northern California town who would love to go to Broadway someday. So I bought another copy of the book for her and we read it together. So, if you're ever trying to read a few more like middle grades books or YA novels or whatever, maybe like read it with someone that a niece or nephew or something like that. So yeah, this one was really fun to read. It's, very cheesy, very middle grades. The characters are pretty predictable and two-dimensional, but whatever, it was good. The next book that I read was quite different. This one is Liberty by Caitlin Greenidge. This one I just saw on Instagram, I'm pretty sure, so definitely follow book accounts on Instagram. That's usually like how I find my next read. It's a really good way to see, kind of like what's new and what's coming out. I haven't seen too many other people who have read this one. Sometimes what I'll do is follow the hashtag of a book title on Instagram, then I can just like see what other people are thinking about it. I think I might have forgotten to follow this hashtag, so I'll have to go on and see what people are saying. This one to me feels like an instant classic. Like it feels, I know this is high praise, but kind of like a Toni Morrison novel or something like that. It's just very unpredictable and like nothing I've ever read before. So the main character, Liberty, grows up in this free town in the north with her mother, who's also free. Her father, I think, had been enslaved at one point and then he became free, but he died when she was younger, or before she was born, I think. It begins like during the Civil War, and then most of the plot takes place after the Civil War. So it's just interesting to read a book during that time period, and it's a novel about these Black characters in the late 1800s, but slavery is a very small part of the plot. It's really not much of it at all. The mother is a doctor, and then the daughter goes to college to become a doctor. She ends up being more interested in like music management. She's kind of rebelling against her mother. The story ends in Haiti, which is something I've not seen in a novel, but that was a really, really interesting aspect of the plot. So I just admired the way that this author like never lets up on the tension. Like, so many of the female characters are just constantly upset with each other, misunderstanding each other, not really saying what they mean. And she doesn't like allow the tension to resolve. I feel like if I were writing a novel, like I would need for my main character to like get forgiven and to like eventually be in everyone's good graces. And she has the discipline to not do that. And it's really, really good. So I highly recommend this one. I would love to hear what other people think about it. And as far as in a classroom, this would be really good for a high school classroom, not really middle school, but I think this would be great as a high school novel. The next one that I read was another History Smashers book, and I have been a big fan of all of the ones that I've read so far, and I've read them all. I've read everything that Kate Messner has come out with so far, and I've pre-ordered the other ones that are coming out soon. So this one is about Pearl Harbor. This one is great if you've got middle school, maybe upper elementary age students. This is a great way for them to learn about Pearl Harbor and what really happened. I would say this one is my least favorite of the four that I have, but it's still very, very good. There's just a few less like myth debunking stories in here, just because I guess a lot of us kind of know a lot about Pearl Harbor already, but you know, for your students, maybe they don't. There were a few kind of like side stories that she includes in here that I did not know and that were very surprising to me. And so I definitely learned quite a bit from this book. It's a quick read. I mean, as an adult, you can just read it in one sitting basically. But yeah, I definitely recommend it. It's hard for me to like act like I'm not doing this. I read this as research for a future book that will be coming out in like a year. But technically we're not really talking about it yet. So motivation wise, research is always a big motivation of mine to get a lot of books read. The next one, of course, was read for the same purpose. This is called Cold War, A Captivating Guide to the Cold War and Space Race Between the United States and Soviet Union by Captivating History. Let's talk about this for a minute. There are a bunch of these books on Amazon, just like within this series and by this publisher. I looked up the author. I forget what his name is, but he like runs the website. There's just like not a lot of transparency behind how these are published. They're definitely self-published. Kind of interesting that it says, make sure to follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube, but they don't give you like the handles. I couldn't find them on Twitter. I thought that would be like the main place. The author of this book definitely knows a lot about the Cold War, and I did learn a lot about the Cold War from this book. However, it frustrated me as a historian because this is not how to do history. So if you look at the bibliography in the back, this is like a high schooler's bibliography. Britannica.com, HowStuffWorks.com, Space.com, ThoughtCo.com, Khan Academy. This is not how you do history. This is not where this person got their information. They just wrote what they knew, and then they like looked up a random site that like had some similar information and put that in their bibliography. Okay, they do have a few like books that they recommend at the end in some very strange format. Like, this is not Chicago style format. I don't know what this is. So strange. And they don't include anything by John Lewis Gaddis as a source, which means they either didn't do their research or they're snubbing him. Like, anyone who is barely a historical scholar of the Cold War knows that this isn't done correctly. This is not how you do it. Like, you do your research. So your bibliography should be mostly other secondary sources, like actual books, and then maybe some primary source documents where you pull together some of your own conclusions and you include all of the steps for getting to where you got in your book, so then somebody else can kind of follow that same path and like continue the research to add to this body of knowledge about the Cold War. Like, history is very collaborative, even when we're all writing our own books or our own papers or articles or even like reviews of books and articles. The purpose is for us all to contribute to a body of work, and he did not leave any kind of a trail for how he got to his conclusions. I guess you could make the argument that this is like a way to kind of subvert academia and just like publish things on your own and do it your own way. But it's not good. Like, there's a reason why we do things a certain way in history and in academia, and so I can't say that I recommend this. It's like, fine, you'll learn a few things, but if I'm writing a book, I cannot cite this as a source. This is not valid. So yeah, I don't really know what else to say about this, but if you've read any of the captivating history books, let me know your thoughts. I don't know, what do you think about this? Because I'm not really on board. So the next book that I read was more research, and this is one that I've had forever, and I thought I had read it, and then I was like, oh, you know what, I don't think I actually have. So this is a graphic novel by John Lewis, about John Lewis. It looks like this on the inside. So this is intended for students to learn more about the civil rights movement, and so the way that they kind of like frame this and set it up is pretty interesting. It's set on the day of Obama's inauguration, and we're in John Lewis's office at the White House, and there's this woman who comes in that really wants to meet him, and she has like her 2 grandsons or nephews with him, and she wants them to meet him, and so he's telling them stories about what the civil rights era was like for him and what growing up was like for him. And so it'll kind of like jump back and forth in time. It'll be the morning of the inauguration, and they're like looking for hats and gloves because it's going to be cold outside. And then he'll like slip back into his story and tell them about the chicken farm that he grew up on and how he went to college, and you know, these colleges were segregated, and his involvement in the lunch counter sit-ins. So it's fairly short. There are 2 more books in this series. I have them somewhere over here, and I can't wait to read those. So this one doesn't include a whole lot of marching, to be honest. I was kind of under the impression that this was going to be about the March on Washington, but it's not really. So I'm excited to read, you know, books 2 and 3, and they'll like continue the story on. So these are definitely great ones to get for your classroom. Even though I recommended this before I'd ever read it, now that I've read it, I still highly recommend. The next book that I read this month was The Last Story of Nina Lee by Nancy Ju-Yoon Kim. And this was part of Amory's book club. So pretty much every single month I have a book to share with you from Amory's book club. I recently got some swag too. I have a sweatshirt, and this is my little tote bag. This will carry a lot of books. I'm excited to like go to a bookstore and carry this with me. Both of these together are kind of fun. It's been just like extra cool for me joining Amory's book club. I've been part of it for a little over a year. I mean, I found her on YouTube because I watch a ton of BookTube. Plus I was, of course, like a fan of her music. And then just through like being active in the book club, a couple months ago I got to be in the Instagram live and talk with her, and like we're like friends now. Like we talk all the time on Instagram and DMs and stuff. It's kind of cool. So you just never know, like the power of social media to connect people and introduce you to people is just, I'm continually surprised. But anyway, that's another suggestion for reading a little bit more, is to join some kind of an online book club. This one is monthly, so you know, it would at least keep me reading a book per month. And this one was really good. It's set in Los Angeles, so it's very like LA specific, and it's about a woman who immigrates to the United States from Korea in like the early 80s, I think, and she had this really, really tragic life back in Korea and lost everything. She was an orphan of the war and lost, you know, her husband and child, and it's just this heartbreaking story. And then she comes to the United States, and she technically doesn't have documents. She's living in the shadows. She's trying to rebuild her life. One thing that's kind of interesting is showing in LA just like the side-by-side experiences of Korean immigrants and Mexican immigrants. Those are her friends. They work together in this grocery store. They're all kind of living just on the edge of poverty and of being deported. And I thought it was funny that she doesn't really have like motivation to learn English because she doesn't really talk to anybody who speaks English, but she does know some Spanish. So she speaks like Korean and Spanish, and a lot of the people who are Spanish speakers also speak Korean. Later on, she ends up like selling clothes, I guess, out of a booth at the swap meet. And so, I mean, she's really, really just living on the margins. And it's hard for those of us who, you know, don't understand that experience to imagine how difficult that is. And this just opened my eyes to see those people more, you know, and just to look out for them and just to understand how much they're going through. And then I'm talking about Mina Lee's side of the story. The perspective does shift back and forth between her and then her daughter, who is American and speaks English, and so they are really not even able to communicate very well because her mother speaks Korean and Spanish, of course, and then the daughter speaks English and doesn't speak Korean very well, and so they can't ever even really get to know each other all that well because they have this language barrier, and they also have just like a trauma barrier. Like the mom does not want to burden her daughter with all of this, all these horrible things that have happened to her, but the mother unexpectedly dies, and the daughter's trying to piece together what happened. So it's interesting. I recommend it for sure. One thing that I noticed as I was reading through it is that it's written at quite a low reading level. Like we never really think about that in adult books. We definitely do with, you know, middle grades and young adults, anything that we're assigning for a class. You know, we think about like the Lexile level. But of course we would need like a variety of Lexile levels in books intended for adults as well. Like just because someone has graduated from high school doesn't mean they all have the same Lexile level. And so I appreciated that about this one. This is an accessible book. And I feel like maybe the author did that on purpose. So maybe if English is someone's second, third, fourth language, this would be a story that they are able to read, and it's complex and it's interesting and it's nuanced, but just the actual vocabulary and structure of the sentences is not going to make this book something that is just like unachievable to read for a lot of people. So I thought that was kind of interesting. So yeah. The next book that I read this month was Against the Loveless World by Susan Abuhawa. And the motivation for reading this one is the fact that for my entire life, I've never learned very much about Palestine or Palestinians. In fact, I know very little about the Middle East, despite the fact that I have a master's degree in history. With the increased violence against Palestinians in Israel/Palestine/Jerusalem/Gaza, right now I was kind of scrambling to put together in my mind like a schema, you know, like even a place in my brain for all of this information to fit. I had so little background knowledge that it was hard to even like attach new information anywhere. I'm like, wait a minute, how does this all fit together? I don't understand. And really the only information that I had in my mind was like years of this subtle messaging from evangelical churches about how, you know, reestablishing Israel is going to bring about the end times, and about how anyone who is against Israel in any way, is like bringing about the destruction of the world, and how, for whatever reason, these churches are so connected to Israel, even though they have like no sense of support for just like Jewish people in general. I don't know. A lot of what I knew started to kind of like unravel. I'm like, why were these messages even pushed so hard? Why? Like, think of all the propaganda from like the 90s, like those books about the end times, whatever those were called, and then like a ton of Left Behind series, right? And just like all of this theology about the end times, and completely ignoring like just, you know, anything that was happening in reality, like in real time. So anyway, this book is written from the perspective of a Palestinian. I didn't have any Palestinian voices just in me anywhere. I had lots of propaganda and messaging about Israel, but I really didn't have any facts or any context or any understanding of what's actually going on. And this book definitely provided a lot of that. So this story is about a Palestinian woman whose family, well, like first they were displaced out of Palestine to Kuwait, and she like grows up in Kuwait, and then I don't have a great understanding of this either, but after the United States invaded Iraq, she had to leave as well, and so then her whole family has to relocate again to Jordan. And there's this legal issue of someone that she married when she was like 19, and she was only living with him for like a few months, but she needs to secure a divorce, but he's back in Palestine, so she needs to go to Palestine. She is Palestinian, but it's like incredibly difficult for Palestinians to travel from Jordan, for example, like across the Jordan River into the West Bank. And it's just very eye-opening to understand that like I, as an American Christian, could join in on almost any like trip to Israel that like all of these churches host and sponsor or whatever, but someone who's actually Palestinian would have an infinitely more difficult time going to visit like the house that their mother grew up in Palestine. There are all these checkpoints, and Palestinians are completely treated as second-class citizens. They have entirely different rules. I mean, millions of them are refugees. They can't travel freely. Their water supply is controlled by Israel. Their electricity is controlled by Israel. I don't think most Americans understand this. I mean, because if we look at, you know, March, we understand that that was not right when we had segregation and Jim Crow laws and black people were treated differently. But we give billions of dollars to Israel every year, who has these same kind of policies. And yes, it is very complicated, and there are other countries that are trying to obliterate Israel, but also, I mean, I would like to check into that a little bit more. And the establishment of Israel, even though like I feel like I agree with it on just this level where I care about the safety of Jewish people and understand that we have this legacy of oppression, and there's just nothing that's comparable to the Holocaust. But I just don't understand how we then turn around and treat Palestinians in a similar way in order to protect Jewish people. I just think that that is actually not creating safe conditions for Jewish people either, when we have these nation states that are very right-wing and very like ethno-nationalist and create different rules based on different ethnicities. Like, I don't know. So this month, the murders of innocent Palestinians have just definitely been on my mind, and I would highly, highly recommend this book for some more understanding. And I'm going to continue to be researching and listening and trying to understand more about this situation, but that was my motivation for reading this one this month. On a bit of a lighter note, the next book that I read was called Tokyo Ever After by Amiko Jean, And I do get sent, you know, mostly young adult books like for my classroom from different publishers because they know that I'm a teacher and I like to talk about books on my Instagram and YouTube and all of that. So if you too want to be sent free books from publishers when they come out, just create a strong social media presence where you talk about books all the time, and eventually people will start reaching out to you and want to send you books. So this was advanced reading copy. This one is from Flatiron Books. And so, you know, I'll just kind of like flip through and read a little bit. And this book caught my attention because the beginning of it is set in Mount Shasta, and the main characters spend a lot of time at Black Bear Diner, which is one of my favorite restaurants. And I grew up not too far from Mount Shasta, so I like understand all of the references. And I spent a lot of time in Black Bear Diner in high school, just like these girls, eating pie and mashed potatoes. So that was just really fun to read. The setting quickly shifts over to Japan, and this book, the best way that I can describe it is it's the Japanese version of What a Girl Wants with Amanda Bynes. Remember that movie from like the 2000s? It's very cute. I love a story like that. They're always cheesy, but this one is really funny. It's pretty predictable. I thought the love story was like, meh. That part I was not so into, but I loved her friends, her friendships, and just like everything that she learns about Japan and all of that, and just all the Black Bear Diner references. So this one is great. Put it in your high school classroom for sure. So the Black Bear Diner references were what kept me going with that one. I'm gonna recommend one more book, even though I haven't actually finished this one yet. So this is John Green's new book, The Anthropocene Reviewed. Just to let you know that I also am in John Green's online book club, but this is actually not the book for Life's Library this month. We're reading The Song of Achilles, which I'm not done with yet, and I have another tote bag from Life's Library. So these are my two. I'm in Amory's book club and the Life's Library book club. So yeah, I just like being in two because they tend to pick pretty different books. And then in the meantime, John Green also came out with his first book of nonfiction, and I really like this one. I'm trying to savor it. I'm trying not to go through it too quickly, so I have it like on my nightstand, and I've been reading a little bit each night. It's a book of essays just about different kind of random things, and he reviews them and then gives them a rating based on the 5-star rating at the end of each chapter. And it's kind of a way to like make fun of our 5-star rating system of everything, but also to just talk about things that he cares about in this era of the Anthropocene that we are currently living in, where humans have pretty full control over everything on the planet Earth. We affect the climate, we affect animals, we can affect the weather, all of that. So it's very interesting, and I feel like I just kind of have like a special place in my heart for John Green. We have some similarities, you know. I feel like basically we're kind of these very average, mediocre white people, you know, who like to think out loud on the internet, and we're a little bit scattered. So, you know, I've got my YouTube channel. He basically invented vlogging with Hank Green, so like this probably would not be a thing had it not been for John and Hank Green. He does crash course history stuff. I do history stuff. He writes. I like to write. He does novels though. I don't really write young adult novels, but I read them and I talk about them with my students. And he's also very concerned, as am I, just about like the impact that we're having on the world and what to do with any kind of a platform that we have. And as he's getting older, he's, you know, just a couple years older than me, but just like, okay, what does this all mean? Is this much social media healthy for us? And he's pulled back quite a bit. And it's hard for him to be an author and so, you know, like exposed on social media, because authors tend to be kind of more hermitish type people. So, you know, people are always reading into everything in his novels. And so, you know, he decided to write a book of nonfiction that's more just about his thoughts, and you don't have to have all this speculation. So yeah, I feel like I've, you know, grown up with him in a way. And so I just wanted to recommend this one. I'll probably talk about it again in next month's video, but very, very good. Although he does write that in high school he hated the music of Mariah Carey, and so This is where we differ quite a bit, John. We are not the same in that regard. So anyway, I hope that this gives you a little bit of inspiration for how to choose some books that you might enjoy, how to put together a little bit of a TBR list, which is to be read. That's like the social media slang for it, the Bookstagram, booktuber slang. Although I feel like it would be easier just to say like to read. These are books to read. We really complicate it with to be read, but that is what it is. So yeah, again, I think I'll make another video like specifically about the books that I want to read this summer. Maybe we can read some of them together. I never really stick to my TBR though. I just kind of like, I buy all of these books and some of them stick, some of them I end up finishing like months later. I'm sure I'll have a few of those to talk about next time too. So anyway, got my little stack here. Thank you so much for listening through this video. I know this one ended up being kind of a long one, and I will see you more this summer. I'm excited for summer. It's been a long school year, so thank you again for watching. I will see you in my next video. Bye.